All right, this court is now in session.
Please be seated, thank you. Let's go back on the record and let the record reflect counsel for the state, counsel for the defense, and defendants are all present, as well as the witness. Mr. Bregman?
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. Good afternoon, Chief.
Good afternoon, sir.
I first want to just touch on something that I heard in the direct question of you. The prosecutor in this case was talking about a safe distance away from someone with a knife, right? And that eventually there is some safe distance, correct?
Yes, sir.
So in other words, if you get far enough away from someone that is giving you some safe distance, don't
Yes,
get
sir.
hurt. Okay? But police officers, when they have to, police officers aren't like everybody else where you can just walk away from danger all the time. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
In fact, sometimes police officers actually have to go to somebody, don't they, that is a dangerous person, right?
Yes.
It's a dangerous job, isn't it?
Yes.
And for example, one reason that an officer may have to go to a person in this safe or danger zone, whatever that might be, would be because that person has to be arrested, right?
That could be, yes, sir.
And your understanding, if someone commits a felony on a police officer, aggravated assault, for example, with a deadly weapon, meaning 2 knives, that person needs to be arrested, don't they?
Objection, Your Honor. I think now he's trying to turn this into the specific facts of this case and ask him his opinion on the case.
Any response?
I'm not asking the specific facts of this case. I'm simply elaborating on her question about safe distance.
I'll let you ask this question. Let's try not to stay away from the ultimate issue if we're getting
Sure.
there, okay?
And so would you agree with me, Chief, that someone who's committed an aggravated assault with a deadly weapon on a police officer needs to be arrested for that, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that is, one, because they committed a felony, and also because of the safety of the community, the officers, and all the other people that might be around, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let me go a little bit back into your background, just a little bit, a touch of that. Chief, you were a New Mexico State Police officer for 10 years, from 1975 to 85, is that right?
Yes, sir.
You've been a bureau chief at DPS, the Department of Public Safety, for advanced training, correct?
Yes, sir.
You were the chief from 2002 to 2010. You were the United States Marshal for the state of New Mexico, correct?
Yes, sir.
Chief, you were appointed Cabinet Secretary of the New Mexico Department of Public Safety in 2011, correct?
Yes, sir.
And in that capacity, you oversaw the Law Enforcement Academy, correct?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, you oversaw a gentleman named Jack Jones, who's responsible for ensuring that the Law Enforcement Academy, as its director, complies with state regulations and laws when it comes to training, correct?
That is correct.
Chief, you are now the chief of the Albuquerque Police Department, correct?
Yes, sir.
Is it fair to say that you have over 20 years, and I don't know if that's the right number, of law enforcement experience?
Yes, sir.
How many years do you actually have, do you think?
Over 20.
Over 20. Chief, you would agree with me that through those 20 years you've had training yourself, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you've had experiences as a law enforcement officer yourself, correct?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, oftentimes today, or not today because you're in a suit and tie, but when you are the chief of police, you walk around in a uniform of the Albuquerque Police Department, isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you wear a gun on the side of your hip, isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And why is it that you wear a gun on the side of your hip when you're wearing that uniform?
Well, first reason is it's part of our uniform, but number two, it's in case it's needed.
Okay. Chief, you would agree with me that through your training and experience that a police officer is authorized to use deadly force when the officer perceives a deadly threat upon a fellow police officer, right?
Yes, sir.
Chief, you would agree with me that a knife like this is a deadly weapon, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that's based on your training and expertise, correct?
Yes, sir.
You would agree with me that a police officer, let's say you as a police officer, you're out there in your uniform today, yesterday, whenever you were out in your uniform, and there was a man who approached you and threatened to kill you, and then got between approximately less than 10 feet away from you with knives in his hand, and made a threatening gesture towards you. Based on your training experience, are you allowed to defend yourself and shoot that man?
Objection, ultimate issue, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Okay? How are you trained to deal with a situation like that? What should be your response?
Objection, ultimate issue, Your Honor.
I'll allow him to answer the question as to how he would react, but let's be careful. I don't want to cross that line of the ultimate issue would lead.
How would you react as a police officer, sir?
Well, quite frankly, it would depend on the environment. It would depend upon the situation. What I mean by that is how long I've been in contact with that person, short time, long time. It would depend on many different things, the choices that I may or may not have.
As a police officer, and you're based on your training, if you perceive that there's a deadly threat upon yourself, you're allowed to take action, correct?
Yes, sir.
And what would that action be based on your training?
Well, again, it would depend upon that situation.
If you thought you were going to get stabbed, sir?
Yes, sir, I'm authorized to use deadly force.
Now, the same situation, the same perception that you would have there, based on your training experience, but it's another officer that you're about to see, or that you are seeing being threatened with deadly lethal force. What is your response, or what are you authorized as a police officer to do in that situation?
I'm authorized to use all the way up to deadly force.
In fact, would you agree with me that as a police officer, that if you thought a fellow officer was about to die or be seriously harmed, that you would use lethal force to prevent that from happening?
If it was necessary, yes.
And your understanding of your training in a situation where you're close to someone with 2 knives or 1 knife, and you're close to that situation, is your experience and your training and from what you've learned as a police officer, that when you're in very close proximity to someone with a knife, that knife is to be treated as a dangerous weapon the same way a gun would be? Is that correct?
It depends on the totality of the circumstances, but yes.
In fact, someone very close to you, you're trained, the threat of a knife to you is just as serious as the threat as someone with a gun. Isn't that correct?
Depending upon the circumstances, yes.
Can I have just a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Well, actually, before I do that, let me back up for a second. I saw these SOPs talked about a little bit, and I think the exhibit number for the CIT ones is it exhibit 2? Council? 2? Is the CIT? Do you still have those in front of you?
I don't, they're going to get them.
Can I approach you on this?
Yes.
So, I'm looking at page 2 of Exhibit 2. See if you can put that in front of you. And I'm going to put it up on the, I don't know if I could figure out how to turn this on, Your Honor. This screen isn't on. Does it show up on anybody?
No.
No.
Well, I don't know if this one's off or what, or maybe we have somebody that can help me here.
I think it needs to be switched over to the yellow mode.
And where is that?
You want to help him?
Please?
Do that?
I think you need to do it, Judge. If I believe correctly, there's a small control box to your right.
Oh, well, if you need to come up here and do that, I mean. Okay. Is that working?
It's coming up, but
Okay.
we'll see if it's gonna, what I put on here comes up or not. That I don't know. It looks like it's on the little screen here, but it's not showing up on the big one. Do you have a screen next to you, Chief?
Yes, sir, I do.
And you also have the actual exhibit in front of you as well, right?
Yes, sir.
And I represent to you that this is page 2 of the actual, of the exhibit, right? Of the SOP, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and here it talks about determining danger. And am I correct in that your SOPs, and I've highlighted some of this, the second sentence, specific indicators may exist to assist the officer in determining if an apparent mentally ill person represents an immediate or potential danger to him, herself, officers, or others. These indicators include, but are not limited to the following. You see that where I'm reading?
Yes, sir.
And it says the availability of weapons to the subject. Does that mean that the officer is supposed to be cognizant if the subject has any weapons or has any weapons available to him?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and the next one says substantiated statements, either direct threats or subtle innuendo by the person that he or she is prepared to commit a violent or dangerous act, or the actual commitment of a violent or dangerous act. For example, a subject saying that he's going to kill a police officer, right? That could be something along those lines, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then the third one, it says personal history known or provided that reflects prior violence under similar circumstances. Perhaps knowledge of the fact that a subject has committed an aggravated battery on a police officer. That would be something that would fall into that category, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then fourth, failure to commit a violent or dangerous act prior to the arrival of the officer does not guarantee that such an act will not occur. What does that mean? What are we telling officers in that statement?
Well, I think it's telling them to be on guard. It says failure to commit a violent or dangerous act prior to the arrival of officers does not guarantee that such act will not occur. In other words, it's do not let your guard down. Be aware of the totality of the circumstances.
And I know this is fairly simplistic, but the reason for that is because mentally ill people can be very dangerous, can't they?
They can be.
I'm just Your Honor. Yeah, I noticed that the prosecutor asked you the question about somehow that there was a change of policies or change in the SOPs and the use of force since this incident, right?
That is correct.
But that change of policy had nothing to do with the issues involved in this case, did it?
No, sir.
Nothing whatsoever. So that's just a red herring. In other words, the new policy wasn't put in place because of something you learned at this shooting, did it? Wasn't?
No, sir.
Your Honor, I pass the witness.
Let's begin.
Thank you, Judge. Chief, do you have the training materials up here, or do they take them away from you? The
No.
Officer Perez and Officer Sandy's training materials, or they got over here in the witness file now?
Oh, hang on. Here they are. They're marked as exhibits.
Okay, great. You'll pull out that first one for Don Perez. Can you tell the court the date that he became CIT certified, that is Crisis Intervention Trained Certified?
May 23rd of 2014.
And this shooting was May 16th of 2014?
Would you restate
Yes, sir.
the dates?
This shooting was March 16th of 2014?
That's correct.
All right, and so he was CIT certified after this shooting happened?
That is correct.
All right. If the training an officer receives differs from the SOPs, for example, if he goes to a conference somewhere and somebody trains him differently than your SOP, which one is he supposed to follow, your SOP or the thing he learns at some training outside of APD?
All officers are obligated to follow our operating procedures.
Okay. Even if they go to some seminar and somebody tells them something differently?
Objection, leading.
I'll allow the question.
They should follow our policies and procedures.
All right. When we're talking about the use of force and analyzing the use of force, who are police supposed to protect and serve?
Well, they're supposed to protect our general public, our community. That's where protect and serve comes from.
Okay. And does that include citizens that they're arresting?
Yes.
And would it include James Boyd?
Yes.
when they were asking you hypotheticals about certain situations, you said it all depends on the circumstance. Should deadly force, as a general rule, be a last resort?
I think that's a,
It is not part of the SOP, not part of the case law, not part of any UJI. It is truly irrelevant to this case.
I believe this area was opened up.
Oh, it sure was.
I'll allow the state to pursue it. Go ahead.
would you restate the question?
Yes, sir. When it comes to the use of deadly force, shouldn't deadly force be a last resort?
It should be the last resort, but sometimes it may not be the first option.
Right. If sometimes in your dealings over the years with people, they can get pretty nasty with you, I imagine.
Yes.
No matter how nasty someone is to you, if they surrender, what is an officer allowed to do as far as punishing them with non-lethal force or punishing them with lethal force? No matter how nasty they've been to them, if they surrender to them.
It's prohibited.
Okay. Thanks, Judge. That's all the questions I have. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. You may step down. Do we need to, can we excuse this witness?
Yes, we can, Judge. Let's get him back to work.
Defense?
No problem. Excuse me, Your Honor, I just wanted to, I don't know the text value of the rule, but I'm asking that the rule be invoked on us.
Okay. And so you don't need this witness again?
No.
All right, thank you. And if there are any witnesses in the courtroom, the rule's been invoked. I'd ask that you remain outside, not discuss the matter until you're called to testify.
Judge, the other thing I would ask is that everybody talk to their own witnesses about not watching the live streaming video if they're going to be witnesses. I mean, you could be outside the courtroom but still be watching everything that's going on.
Any objection to that request?
No, not for the defense, although I will just say I don't have necessarily contact right this minute with any of those possible witnesses, so.
There's that.
All right. Well, I would ask that both sides that when you do have contact with your witnesses, please advise them not to follow the streaming that apparently is going on.
I may not be able to tell anybody that until this afternoon after we're done here, but I will do that.
All right, thank you. Your next witness, please.
Your Honor, the state calls John McDaniel.
Would you raise your right hand for me? Do you swear or affirm under the penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Please be seated.
Can you introduce yourself and tell us what you do for a living, please?
My name is John McDaniel, and I'm an Albuquerque police officer.
In fact, are you one of the Albuquerque police officers who was, open space officers who was called to investigate a claim of illegal camping on March 16, 2014?
Yes.
Before we talk about that, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about your job as an open spaces officer. So what's an open spaces officer do?
We patrol the open space areas of Albuquerque. We patrol in the mesas, the bosque, the foothills, and the mountains.
And so am I correct that these are portions that are within city limits that don't necessarily have buildings or things like that on them?
Correct.
As part of your job as an open space officer, how often do you have to deal with people who are camping illegally in the bosque or the foothills?
It happens pretty often.
Sometimes more than once a day?
It could happen more than once a day.
And are there times when you come across people who are camping out in the open spaces who aren't doing it just for the fun of it?
True.
But sometimes you come across people who are homeless, for example?
Right.
And when someone complains about, for example, a homeless person camping in the open spaces, is it fair to say that part of your job is to go investigate that and see what needs to happen?
Objection leading.
Could you rephrase, please?
What is part of your job when you get a call involving a person camping in the open spaces?
Investigate.
Do you have options about what to do with the person you come across in the open spaces camping?
Yes.
What are those options?
We can educate them. We can cite them, arrest them. It's just up to us.
And when you say educate them, what do you mean by that?
Just give them options where they could go. If they need to go to a homeless shelter or other places like that, or where to find food.
Is it your experience as an officer that sometimes arresting or giving a ticket to a homeless individual isn't as effective as other means?
Can you repeat that?
Let me ask you this. Is it your experience that oftentimes homeless people don't have the means to pay for a citation if you issue one?
Correct.
Is it your experience that they often don't have transportation to make it to court if you issue a citation?
Correct.
Between choosing to arrest someone or choosing to educate them or give them a citation, which do you typically do when you come across a homeless person camping in open space?
Typically, we educate them.
And why is that?
Because a lot of times they don't know that they can or cannot camp there, or they just, they might just be down on their luck and they don't know where to go.
I'd like to talk to you about pocket knives. Were you ever Boy Scout?
No.
No? You ever know any Boy Scouts?
Yes.
Do you know whether Boy Scouts often carry pocket knives?
I'm sure they do.
Do you know whether campers of other kinds often carry pocket knives?
Yes.
Why do campers, in your experience, will you ever camp?
Oh, of course I do.
In your experience as a camper, why do people carry pocket knives when camping?
Just use it for whatever you need. Cut a rope, or cut a fishing line.
And could it be equally as useful for cutting rope or cutting fishing line or using as it sounds like you're describing it being used as a tool, is that correct?
It's actually leading.
That's not lead, counsel. Rephrase, please.
When you describe it being used in that manner, is that being used as a tool or a weapon?
Well, that would be used as a tool until you decide to use it as a weapon.
Okay, so when we're talking about using a pocket knife as a tool, can it be used by a tool, as a tool for somebody who's camping in the Albuquerque open spaces?
Sure, they're using it as a tool.
Is there a difference between having a pocket knife and being armed with a pocket knife?
I don't really see a difference.
Well, wouldn't you agree between having a pocket knife and being armed with a pocket knife, one suggests that is a weapon and the other...
Leading.
Rephrase the question, please.
When you use the word armed, what do you mean by that?
You have it?
Simply have it, is what you mean?
Correct.
Is there then a distinction between having a pocket knife and having a pocket knife as a weapon?
Sure.
And what's
Depends
that?
on when you use it, how you use it.
Okay. In your training and experience as an Albuquerque police officer, have you seen that homeless members are some of our most vulnerable citizens?
Can be.
And why is that?
Don't have anywhere to go.
I'm sorry.
Could you repeat your answer?
Oh, don't have anywhere to go. Don't know what to do.
Is it your experience that homeless people are often the subject of violence? The victims of violence, I should say?
I don't know for sure.
Have you ever investigated a case where a homeless person had been the victim of violence?
Yes.
Have you ever investigated a case where a homeless person had been the victim of violence by another homeless person?
Yes.
Have you ever investigated a case where a homeless person had been a victim of violence by somebody who was not homeless?
This time, I'm just going to check the relevance. Not the cover and look. Instead, see the relevant.
Any response?
Your Honor, this is relevant to show, I think, how the officers responded to this report of an individual illegally camping and the recognition of this individual as a homeless individual, and also the reason why this person might have been carrying knives and how this officer perceived that when he came across that fact.
I'll find that there's relevance to it. Overrule the objection. You may proceed.
Have you ever investigated a case where a homeless person was the victim of violence by a non-homeless person?
I believe so.
Is it your experience, well, why do people arm themselves with weapons?
I hope to protect themselves.
understand the difference between a show of force and a use of force?
Yes.
What's the difference?
Well, show of force. A show of force, you're just showing them that this is what can happen, and a use of force is actually carrying out with it.
Sir, could you move that microphone a little bit closer to you? I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Could a show of force be producing a handgun or firearm to show that you're armed with firearm?
Sure.
Could it be the same with a knife?
Sure.
I'd like to talk to you about what you did on March 16th, 2014. We understand that you were sent out on a call because of an indication that there was a man who'd been camping out in the open spaces. Where were you sent out to? Where were you dispatched?
812 Piedra Vista Road, Northeast.
And when you arrived there, were you told by dispatch that there were any crimes other than illegal camping being reported?
Well, the CAD report just showed that, that it was a call about a homeless camp in the open space.
Okay, so that was the only thing you were investigating at that point, is that correct?
Correct.
And when you arrived, who did you speak to?
Mr. Thixton,
And who did you understand Mr. Thixton to be?
the caller.
Was anyone with you?
Yes.
Who was with you?
Officer Patrick Hernandez.
And who is that?
He was another open space officer.
I know this is an odd question, but when you and Officer Hernandez encountered Mr. Thixton, the caller, did either of you draw your weapons at that point?
No.
Did you know at that point that Mr. Thixton actually had a pistol?
No.
So you didn't know that he had a .380 Auto Ruger LCP pistol on his person at that time?
No.
So after you spoke with Mr. Thixton, did he tell you where the area of concern was that he wanted you to investigate?
Yes.
And did you go up to that area?
Yes.
So tell us about, well, when you went up to there, did you meet a person?
Did I what?
Did you see a person up there when you went up there?
Yes.
And did you understand at that point that that person you were meeting, where he was essentially his home at that time?
I wouldn't call it his home.
What would you call it?
I don't know. He was camping.
Okay. Did you understand how long he had been there? Did you know?
I heard about a month.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Go ahead.
Officer McDaniel, I'm handing you what's been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 18A and B. With the exception of the fact that these were obviously taken after the incident in question, do you recognize what's depicted in these two pictures?
Yes.
And what is that?
A tarp and bags, clothing.
And is that what we would call James Boyd's campsite that you came across that day?
Yes.
Is that picture fairly and accurately depict James Boyd's campsite, more or less as it was when you arrived?
Well, the tarp was up. It wasn't down.
Other than the tarp being up, do those pictures fairly and accurately depict the campsite as you remember it that day?
Yes.
Your Honor, move the admission of 18A and B.
Any objection to those two exhibits?
Well, it's admitted, Your Honor, for the purpose of showing what the camp looked after the incident involving James Boyd, not at the time that that the encounter occurred with the open space officers.
I believe that's what the prosecution had said. Any objection?
No.
18A and B will be admitted.
So when we look at these pictures, Mom, we'll leave that there. Under that tarp where Mr. Boyd was laying, did he have a lot of stuff?
I couldn't tell under the tarp.
Okay. What position was he in when you approached him under the tarp there?
He was kind of lying down with his knees up.
What did you say when you first approached him?
How's it going?
And how did he respond?
He looked at me.
And at that point, is it fair to say you were concerned because you could only see one of his hands?
Yes.
Now, when you approached Mr. Boyd, as you indicated with any camper, is it fair to say that you had several choices on what you could do to investigate and deal with this claim of illegal camping?
What do you mean by, I don't understand what you mean by several choices.
Well, you've testified that when encountering an illegal camper, one of the things is you could educate them about other options. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you could have done the same for Mr. Boyd?
Eventually.
At the moment you first approached is where I'm getting at.
At the moment I first approached, no.
Why is that?
Because he wouldn't show me his hands.
Okay, so you were concerned from the get-go because you couldn't see his hands?
Yes.
If you could have seen his hands, and there was no concern about that, would it have been possible to treat him the same as any other illegal camper you encountered?
Judge calls for speculation.
I want to sustain the objection. Counsel asks you to move on, please.
Well, we know that when you approached Mr. Boyd's camp, did you follow the Albuquerque Police Department standard operating procedure on the use of your digital recorders?
Yes.
And we know that in part because we've seen the recording, is that correct?
Objection leading.
Sustained as to leading.
Did you turn in a video of your encounter, your initial encounter with Mr. Boyd?
Yes.
I just want to make clear, when you first approached Mr. Boyd, how many of his hands could you not see?
One.
So how many of his hands could you see?
One.
Okay. Do you have an idea of approximately how soon after you encountered Mr. Boyd and said, hey, how's it going, that you and Officer Hernandez produced your pistols?
Can you repeat the question?
How soon after when you encountered Mr. Boyd did you and Officer Hernandez draw your pistols?
Maybe a couple minutes.
Oh, okay, so how soon after the start of the recording? We'll get to that. We'll watch the recording together. Now, at the time that you and Officer Hernandez pulled out your pistols, had you seen a knife in his pocket yet?
No.
At the time that you and Officer Hernandez pulled out your pistols, had he threatened you in any way?
Just the fact that he wouldn't show me his hands.
Had he said anything threatening to you?
No.
Had he stood up?
No.
Had he run at you?
No.
In the first minute or so of talking with Mr. Boyd, did he say anything to you that led you to believe that he suffered from mental illness?
No.
Did you ultimately come to determine that he did?
Later on, yeah.
In your training and experience, do you know whether people with mental illness react badly when touched?
I didn't hear the question, I'm sorry.
In your training and experience, do you know whether people with mental illness sometimes react badly when touched?
I guess sometimes.
Just going to object to the speculation, I guess, sometimes. Either he does or doesn't based on his training, Your Honor. Asking.
Well, the question was phrased to ask him in his training and experience, and he answered it, so I'll let the answer stand. Go ahead.
At some point, did you and Officer Hernandez attempt to pat down Mr. Boyd?
There was an attempt.
You know, is it correct that there are legal rules about when you can pat down a citizen?
Sure.
At the time that you and Officer Hernandez decided to pat down Mr. Boyd, did you have any belief he had committed any crimes other than illegal camping?
No, just illegal camping.
And so when you attempted to pat him down, what did he do?
He spun around and displayed knives in an aggressive manner.
When you say he displayed knives in an aggressive manner, where did he pull them out of?
He pulled them out of his front pockets.
So I've got my hands in my front pockets and I'm pulling them out. And I put them at about waist high outward with my thumbs out representing the blades. Is this consistent with how he pulled out those knives?
No, when he pulled them out, they were pointing more towards me.
Toward you, were they higher than my hands or lower than my
They were
hands?
about right there.
Okay, so just for the record, they're a little higher than my belt with the blades pointing toward you, is that correct?
Correct.
At that point, did he lunge at you or Officer Hernandez?
I believe that once he saw me point my weapon at him, that he froze and I was able to create distance. So no, he did not lunge at that time.
Okay. Did he slash or stab at either you or Officer Hernandez?
No.
And you said that he froze when you pointed your pistol at him?
Yes.
And what did you do when he froze after you pointed your pistol at him?
Ordered him to drop the knives and I backed up
Why'd you back up?
to get away from the threat.
Are you trained to back up to get away from the threat?
Yes.
Is that to establish distance?
Yes.
Why is that?
Because I didn't want him to come at me and stab me.
Are you trained about establishing sufficient distance to keep yourself safe when encountering somebody who has an edged weapon?
Yes.
Are you trained on whether, once you've established distance, it's appropriate to unnecessarily close that distance again?
I guess it would depend on the situation.
When you asked him or commanded him to put his knives down, what did he say?
He said, "This is going to get bad. I'm going to kill you."
At any point in that initial encounter, did he express to you that he thought you had attacked him?
Can you repeat the question?
At any point in that initial encounter, did he express to you that he thought you had attacked him?
I don't recall any of that.
In the course of the time that you were interacting with him and the other officers, or two that you were standing there, do you recall him ever saying anything to the effect of, "You guys attacked me"?
I do remember him saying stuff about, he was trying to tell us that we were, causing an attack on him.
Now, we've already established that you checked in your taser camera footage in this case.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Have you watched that taser camera footage?
Yes.
Does that taser camera footage fairly and accurately depict at least what that what that camera and the audio on it picked up that day?
Yes.
Your Honor, we move the admission of State's Exhibits 7A and 7B, which are the complete taser camera footage from this officer and an excerpt, and the state and the defense have stipulated as to the admissibility of State's Exhibit 8, which is
Is that correct, counsel? You've all stipulated to that?
a transcript, Your Honor.
Oh, the transcript?
Of this encounter.
Okay.
So, with regard to Officer Bettis, we did stipulate the admissibility of the transcript of Officer McDaniel's taser footage as well. Proper foundation has been made for the admissibility of Officer McDaniel's taser camera, although there are 3 of them, not just one. So I'm a little unsure whether it's the first one you sought admissibility for or all 3.
Your Honor, this is the taser camera footage of the initial encounter. It's approximately...
Which one, 7B?
7A is the initial encounter. 7B is an excerpt of the initial encounter with portions with the transcript overlaid on it so we can watch the video and read the words from the transcript we stipulated to.
And Mr. Robles, is that your understanding?
Yes, Your Honor.
And I take it you have no objection to those being admitted, you've stipulated to that?
That is correct, Your Honor.
Mr. Bergman?
We did as well, Your Honor.
All right, they will be admitted by stipulation.
All right, I think we can all see this. So, as I said, this is your taser camera footage from your initial encounter with Mr. Boyd. And you'll see words at the bottom that are the stipulated transcript that we just admitted into evidence as well.
Not with that, Kevin, I think it's starting.
Oh, yeah. Put them out. Stop taking police. Look your hand. Look your hand. Look your hand. Okay, well, put them out here. Now, come out. You're literally jumping out here. Come out now. I'm just please, please. Come out now, please. Not me. If you're going to do it, now. Let's go. Okay. All right, now we'll go ahead and help you. No, I'm gonna turn around. Turn around, I'm gonna back you down. Stay around. Drop the knife. 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 Oh, shit, come on. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Look up the security now. Look up the security. Look up the security. Drop the knife. Okay, what's up what? 15.5 feet. Okay, keep your hands out of your pocket. Put the knife down. Put the knife down.
In the video, we see that at one point, your partner, Officer Hernandez, says something about you holster yours and I'll holster mine. Are you trained in de-escalation techniques?
Yes.
Is that consistent with a de-escalation technique? What he said?
I'm not sure about that one.
Well, regardless of whether it's consistent with a technique, did it have the effect of de-escalating the situation at that point at least?
No.
Nobody got hurt at that point, did they?
No.
Did you radio for backup?
Yes.
How long until backup came?
Maybe 10 minutes.
Who came when they came?
Sergeant Carpenter, and it was Officer Wetterland.
At some point in the afternoon, did crisis intervention team trained officers arrive as well?
Yes, Officer Monet.
At a point in time where you and other officers, including the crisis intervention team officers, were there talking with Mr. Boyd, was there ever a conversation explaining to him that if he crossed a rock or crossed a line, he would be shot with a beanbag shotgun?
Yes, he was warned that if he crossed a certain point and came in our direction, he would be hit with the beanbag.
At any point in your encounter with Mr. Boyd, did he ever cross that line?
No, he came close.
Did he ever actually cross it though?
No,
Was he ever shot with a beanbag shotgun?
not while I was up there.
Okay. In your encounter there, was he ever shot with a beanbag shotgun for crossing the line?
No.
At some point, officers from the tactical team arrived. Where were you sent when they arrived?
I was sent to block the walking trail just down below the hill.
Is that where you were at the time that the shooting happened?
No.
Where were you at the time the shooting happened?
I moved with another canine officer back around the hill, just to the north of it.
So on the opposite side of where you had first been walking up toward?
Correct.
Is that where you remained until the shooting happened?
Yes.
Okay, we just saw the video together. You had originally testified that you thought it had been, I think your words were, a couple minutes in your initial encounter with Mr. Boyd that you pulled your weapons. We've now seen the video. Was it shorter than a couple minutes?
Yes.
Was it more like about 11 seconds?
Okay.
Is that a yes, sir?
Yes.
Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Cross-examination. May it please the court? Go ahead. Officer, before you get started, switch it over. In your honor, would you please switch over the screen so that our table can show media?
Oh, to the, are you talking about the document?
Yes.
It's now at the podium, Your Honor. We're at the prosecution table, I think is how it's labeled on your control.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor.
Some of the questions I will ask you will cover some of the issues and areas that you had covered before during your direct examination, but there are some preliminary matters that I sort of want to work through. First of all, when did you begin your work for the Albuquerque Police Department?
2003.
And since 2003, you've been in service as a police officer, is that correct?
Correct.
And when did you begin your work with open space?
About 3 years ago.
So for 3 years, you worked the open space, is that fair to say?
Yes.
Now, on this particular day, you were working as field officers answering calls for service in the open space.
Correct.
Now, what distinguishes an open space officer from an Albuquerque police officer who also takes calls for service?
Well, the field officers take calls in the city, and we take calls outside of the city.
Now, the radio system that both of you use, is that the same, or do you have a different radio system?
It's the same.
Are the policies and procedures that you follow the same?
Yes.
As well as the training?
Yes.
Now, focusing in on that day in question, is it true that on that day your call sign was 1520A?
Yes.
Now, what does A signify?
You're just an acting supervisor.
Okay. So on that day, you were an acting supervisor for that area of the open space.
Yes.
Now, you were with another officer, is that correct?
Yes.
And that's Officer Patrick Hernandez.
Yes.
And his call sign was 1522.
Right.
And the importance of the call signs we'll get to in just a minute. And in order to understand the call signs and how they play into the way in which the Albuquerque Police Department keeps its information, I'd like to ask you a little bit about computer-aided dispatch reports. Are you familiar with those items?
Yes.
In the field, how does a field officer use a computer-aided dispatch report or CAD report?
Well, that's how we get our initial information about the call.
Would you please explain how officers rely upon the information that's on a CAD in order to make assessments about the call that you're responding to?
It just gives us an idea on what we're going to be looking for, what we're going to be dealing with.
Now, would you please explain how the information is placed on the CAD for a call that you respond to?
Well, it gives the caller's name, their address, then it goes to the description of what the caller is calling about. And
if officers transmit, or I should say, go on the radio and make observations about the call, how is that placed on the CAD?
typically it follows your call sign, and the comments are following your call sign.
What I'd like to do at this time is show you a document. It's CAD number P140750695 that's been marked as Officer Pettis or Defendant's Exhibit A. Do you see that in front of you?
Yes.
Do you recognize that document?
Yes.
What is it?
It's just a CAD report.
For what incident is this CAD report?
What's that?
For what incident is this CAD report?
Oh, it's for the incident with the void.
Okay. So as you look at that CAD report, do you see the initial dispatch that you received?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when CAD reports are created they created at the same time that the events that they describe?
Yes.
And are CAD reports created by someone with knowledge of the events that the CAD report describes?
Yes.
Who is that person who does that work?
The dispatchers and 911 operators.
Are CAD reports kept in the regular course of business by APD?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I'd like to move Exhibit A into evidence, the CAD report for the Board Office Involved Shooting Investigation.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
It will be admitted without objection.
I would like to focus initially on your dispatch to 812 Piedra Vista Road. Now, is it fair to say that at approximately, and then we're going to focus in on the times that are listed on the CAD, is it fair to say that about 4:30 p.m. APD radio dispatcher dispatched you and Officer Hernandez to 812 Piedra Vista Northeast?
Yes.
What did the dispatcher inform you about the nature of the call in this case?
We're going to be investigating a homeless camp.
Now, as an open space officer, when there is a call that there is a person camping in the open space, what is it that you do with that call? Is it an investigation of some sort?
Yes.
What kind of investigation?
It's an investigation of a violation of a city ordinance.
So it's fair to say it's a criminal investigation?
Yes.
Again, the violation of city ordinance, if you could explain that to the court, what is your understanding of what the ordinance prohibits and what sanction there is for violation of that ordinance?
Okay, well, it's 5-8-6L, and it prohibits camping in open space without a permit.
Okay. Now, how often do you investigate those kinds of calls?
Pretty often.
Okay. Now, I understand that at about 4:48 p.m., you arrived on scene, is that right?
Yes.
And that's reflected in the CAD report, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, at 4:48, that's when Officer Hernandez arrived, is that correct?
Right, yeah, I arrived at 4:41, you arrived at 4:48.
Now, you were the primary officer on this call, is that right?
Yes.
And as a primary officer, what are you responsible for doing?
Just collecting information.
Okay. Now, Officer Hernandez was a cover officer, is that right?
Correct.
What is the role of a cover officer?
They just started my assistants.
Now, upon reaching 812 Piedra Vista, who did you contact?
Mr. Thixton.
Now, what did Mr. Thixton tell you about how long the suspect had been camping in the foothills?
He said he'd been camping out there about a month.
Did you learn anything about the suspect's description from Mr. Thixton?
Yes.
What did you learn?
His dark clothing.
Okay. Now, you were asked questions about Mr. Thixton's gun, is that right? The state asked you some questions. Didn't you know if Mr. Thixton was armed with a weapon?
Correct.
When you met Mr. Thixton, did he respond to your questions in a calm, rational manner?
Yes.
Would you say he was friendly?
Yes.
So the fact that he was armed with a weapon, now you know it after the fact, does it cause you any concern?
No.
Again, it's legal for someone to possess a firearm, is it right?
Yes.
And it's also legal under certain circumstances for someone to have a concealed weapon, is that right?
Correct.
It's how it's used and when it's used that creates a danger for you, is that right?
Right.
So when they talk about a knife being a tool, you would agree with that. Sometimes a knife is a tool.
Right.
And then sometimes a knife can be used as a deadly weapon.
Yes.
What matters is how the person who's handling the knife, that's everything, isn't it?
Yes.
So if a person decides to take a tool and use it as a weapon, it can be just as deadly to you
Yes.
as a gun. Now, based on the information you learned from Mr. Thixton, is it fair to say that you went into the foothills under the understanding that you were investigating the violation of city ordinance? That is, that an individual was camping illegally in the open space?
Yes.
Now, I want to ask you a little bit about your experience with homeless campers. It's a little bit different than what the state had asked you. And that is, what is your experience in encountering homeless campers and whether they're armed with edge weapons?
They're typically armed most of the time.
Now, what do you generally, in terms of the edge weapons, what types of weapons do you generally see homeless campers using or being armed with?
They have knives, machetes, axes.
Why is that? Do you know why that is, that you find homeless campers with those sorts of weapons?
Culture speculation.
I'll allow the question to be asked if in his experience he's encountered people with these items and the reasons why. So in that, if you frame your question in that sense, I'll allow.
Based on your training and experience, what's your understanding about why homeless campers have axes, knives, and similar edge weapons?
Most of them tell me it's for protection.
Okay. Would it be fair to say that when you approach homeless campers, you go in knowing, based on your training and experience, that there's likely an edge weapon?
Yes.
Now, in your experience in the investigation of homeless campers, would you agree that that places an officer in a potentially dangerous situation?
Yes.
The fact that you're investigating a misdemeanor crime doesn't take away from the fact that you're investigating a misdemeanor suspect who might be armed with an edge weapon.
Correct.
Now, in your experience in investigating cases of homeless campers, you would agree with me that not all homeless campers suffer from mental illness.
No.
And in fact, some people are just down on their luck, and it has nothing to do with some sort of mental disability or mental illness.
Right.
And oftentimes you don't know if a homeless camper is mentally ill until you've actually had an opportunity to interact with them.
Correct.
You don't go into a situation assuming that simply because someone is homeless that they're also mentally ill.
Correct.
You can't know that until you actually interact with them.
Right.
So when you walked up to James Boyd's camp, you didn't go in there with the presumption he was mentally ill, is that right?
Right.
Because that would violate your experience and your training on who these people are.
Right.
Now, with regard to your initial contact with Mr. Boyd, isn't it true that you left 812 Piedra Vista and drove to the Copper Trailhead?
Yes.
And why did you do that?
On occasion, when we come across campers, they may have a warrant, so we may have to make an arrest. So I just didn't want to have to bring him through their yard.
So you didn't want to bring Mr. Boyd through Mr. Thixton's yard, is that right?
Yes.
And so to do that, you drove approximately half a mile away from Mr. Boyd's camp and parked your vehicle.
I believe so, yeah. At Copper.
Now, approximately what time of the day was it when you approached Mr. Boyd's camp?
It's around 4:45 or somewhere around there.
Okay. And you would agree with me that it was a sunny March day in Albuquerque?
Yes.
In fact, it was a beautiful afternoon.
Correct.
You and Officer Hernandez walked up the service road that leads to Mr. Boyd's camp.
Yes.
You made no effort to conceal your identity.
No.
You did not move from cover concealment in order to go to Mr. Boyd's location.
No.
You walked essentially directly to Mr. Boyd.
Yes.
You made no effort to suppress the noise that you were making walking into the open space.
Correct.
You wanted Mr. Boyd to know that you were approaching.
Yes.
This was not an attempt by you to surprise him.
No.
At this time, Your Honor, I would like to play what defendants have marked as Exhibit B1A, which the state has marked as State's Exhibit 7B, and also use a transcript, which we have marked as Exhibit D1, the transcript of the Axon video of Officer McDaniel, which the state has previously marked as State's Exhibit 8.
So we are basically going to play 7 and 8, is that correct?
Yes, we just didn't know in advance that, so this is...
There's no objection there from the state?
So are we, if I'm clear, are we paying the entire?
We will play the tape from the beginning to the 3-minute, 1-second mark, and the transcript we will cover begins at page 2, line 1, and will go to page 7, line 2.
Now, I don't believe that State's 8 has actually been introduced. You said it was defendant's exhibit, but it's also the state exhibit. Is that... Are we talking about
It's the same
7A and 7B?
I remember it as State's Exhibit 8. But it is the same transcript.
If
I understand.
If I may, Your Honor.
Yes.
I believe I moved 7A and B, which are 2 videos, and then I also moved 8, which is a paper transcript, which is in the court's notebook, and the court reporter has one. And so maybe the confusion was that I didn't handle the exhibit, but and we may be doing that through the course of this hearing, Judge, since we provided everyone with copies, including the court reporter. I believe we moved and 8 was admitted as the transcript, but we played 7B, which is the video with part of the transcript on it.
Well, let me ask you, I didn't hear you say you were moving 8 in, but do you have any objection to 8?
No.
No. Okay, so 8 will be admitted as well, and essentially that's what you're going to play with the transcript, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It would just be a longer portion than what the state paid.
Okay.
My apologies, Your Honor. I did not, I guess, apparently actually move. I offered but did not move the admission of 8.
Well, 8's admitted now, so.
Thank you, Your Honor.
These questions.
Open up. Talk to the police. Into your home. Into your home. Into your home. Okay, well, put it out here. Now, come out. You're literally camping out here. Come out now. Now, please, please. Come out now, please. Come out here. If you're going to do your home, go. I can phone you from one point. Okay? No, I'm getting, turn around, and pass you down. There you go. Turn around. Drop the knife. 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 Come on. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. What's up the tree? Yeah. What's up the tree? What's up the tree? Drop the knife. Okay, walk that way. Okay, you good. Now you got your pocket. Put the knife down. Okay, that's all right. Put the knife down.
Boyd's camp. He was inside the camp.
Yes.
Correct? He was awake.
Yes.
He saw you approach.
Yes.
And Mr. Boyd made no indication that he did not understand what was happening.
No.
Now, from the position that Mr. Boyd was in his tent, you could not see one of his hands.
Correct.
And what is it that's dangerous to officers when they cannot account for a hand that cannot be seen?
If we can't see their hands, they can potentially harm us with whatever they might be trying to conceal.
And in order to deal with that potential threat, you made a simple request to
Yes.
show the hands, right?
Yes.
And that's a request that can be responded to in an instant.
Right.
Well, how long did it take Mr. Boyd to do that?
Well, he didn't initially. It took him quite a while.
Now, when you first spoke to Mr. Boyd, I remember your testimony on direct, the first words you said are, "How is it going?"
Yes.
And you would agree with me that when you said those words, "How's it going?" it was done in a professional and friendly tone.
Yes.
There was nothing threatening or aggressive about your voice.
No.
And you would agree with me that you intended not to be threatening to Mr. Boyd when you approached him.
Correct.
Now, you were only there to conduct an investigation. You had not decided how this investigation would turn out. You needed to conduct the investigation before making that determination.
Yes.
Now, the next thing you said was, "Come on out." Does that sound about right?
Yes.
Now, you also said that with a professional tone. In fact, it was friendly. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, you asked Mr. Boyd to come out so that you could separate him from any potential weapons he might have inside the tent. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
And you do that because you know that oftentimes homeless campers have edge weapons, and you wanted to make sure that he was not in close proximity to one.
Correct.
Now, you would agree with me that Mr. Boyd was not immediately compliant.
Yes.
And there was nothing about Mr. Boyd that suggested that he could not be immediately compliant.
Right.
And in fact, you had to order him a number of times to come out of his tent before he actually did.
Right.
Now, during the course of your encounter with Mr. Boyd, you also announced you were the Albuquerque Police Department. Is that fair?
Yes.
Why did you do that?
Just to let him know that we were there for, police business.
Now, when you told Mr. Boyd to show you your hands, let me see your hands, you did so in a professional and calm manner. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
Now, as long as Mr. Boyd kept that hand out of view, you would agree with me that there was a potential for a danger to you and to Officer Hernandez.
Yes.
You were it's hard to deal with the unknown, and in order to deal with the unknown, you drew your weapon, not knowing what Mr. Boyd might do.
Correct.
Now, you didn't point the weapon at him, right?
No.
You held the weapon at the low ready.
Right. I had my weapon out.
Okay. So when you say you have your weapon out, with the court's permission, I'd like the witness to stand and to demonstrate for the court how the weapon was being held. That's fine.
I had my weapon out at my side, as I'm ordering to show his hands. I continue to order him to show his hands, and then finally he starts to move his hands. That's when I raise up just a little bit until I see his hand is clear. Once his hand is clear, I reholster my gun.
Okay. So you only made a show of force.
Right.
Because there was a potential threat.
Yes.
And as soon as the potential threat evaporated, you then reholstered.
Yes.
Because there wasn't a threat immediately apparent to you.
Correct.
So with a show of force, you were able to gain compliance.
Yes.
And you would agree with me that oftentimes a show of force is necessary with certain suspects to get them to comply with commands that most people would simply acknowledge once they're given.
Yes.
Now, when you saw Mr. Boyd stand up, what did you see in his pocket that raised your concern?
I saw a pocket knife.
Now, what exactly did you see of that pocket knife?
I saw it clipped to his right pocket.
So how certain were you that it was a pocket knife?
Well, I was pretty certain it was a pocket knife.
Now, before you saw the knife, what were you going to have Mr. Boyd do while you conduct your investigation?
I was just going to have him come out, step out of the tent, and have a seat,
Okay.
outside of the tent, and then conduct my field interview.
So it's fair to say that when Mr. Boyd came out, it was your intention to have him sit down,
Yes.
and then you would ask him questions about what he was doing there.
Yes.
Your intention was not to pat him down because the threat that was presented by a hidden hand has since dissipated.
Right. I didn't intend to pat him down then until I saw the knife.
Now, with regard to the pat down, that was simply a thought.
Yes.
You never got a chance to pat him down.
No.
Now, upon seeing the knife in his pocket, would you please describe for the court how you approached Mr. Boyd in an attempt to try and conduct a pat-down search?
Well, I asked him to turn around. After I saw the knife, I asked him to turn around. He refused to turn around. Finally, he decided to turn around. So then I told him I was going to pat him down. As I was reaching to do a false touch, he happened to look back, said, "Don't touch me." He spun around and pulled the knives out on us.
You mentioned the false touch. What is that?
It's just we'll reach out and like touch somebody, see if they're going to, react to that before we go up and try to, pat them down or make an arrest.
So before you were going to pat down Mr. Boyd, you were essentially going to test his reaction to a touch.
Yes.
And you do that in order to ensure that going forward, the actual pat down won't create a dangerous situation.
Correct.
But in doing the false touch, Mr. Boyd reacted violently. Is that a fair sentence?
Yes.
And Mr. Boyd reacted violently without you ever touching him?
Yes.
Now, would it be fair to say that at this point, when Mr. Boyd wheeled around and presented you with the knives, you had no idea he was mentally ill?
No.
Anything about Mr. Boyd at that point, or at least up till that time, which suggested that you might be dealing with someone who suffered from mental illness?
No.
Now, again, Mr. Boyd was asked to turn around, and with the court's permission, I'd like to hand the witness what we had marked as Exhibit L, the replica plastic knives, and ask the witness to demonstrate for the court exactly how Mr. Boyd presented the threat that he did with the knives to the officers who were essentially investigating a call.
That's fine.
And if the witness could, with your court permission, stand up and make that demonstration.
So as I was, asking him to turn around, he turns around, and then right as I'm getting ready to do a false touch, he happens to look back and says, "Don't touch me." He spins around, pulls out two knives, and holds them in this manner here. Kind of leans forward towards me.
Okay. What was the expression which Mr. Boyd had on his face?
He looked angry.
Now, to be clear, I want to be able to show the court the knives which Mr. Boyd was using. And what I'd like to do now is to show a series of exhibits that we mark Exhibit E1 through E4, which are photographs that were taken by the Albuquerque Police Department. And in doing so, I'd like to first show the witness and lay a foundation for their admission, unless, of course, the state would be willing to stipulate to their admissibility.
Are you willing to stipulate to the admissibility of E1 through 4?
I think I'd have to see them, Your Honor. No objection, Your Honor.
All right, E1 through 4 will be admitted without objection.
The first exhibit, Officer McDaniel, I'd like to show you is an exhibit we've marked as Exhibit E1, a photograph taken by Detective Kleinfeld. Do you see the item that's depicted in E1?
Yes.
What is it?
A knife.
How certain are you that this is one of the knives which Mr. Boyd used to threaten your life?
I'm certain.
Okay, why is that?
Well, Criminalistics took the picture, so I'm sure it's the one he used.
Now, how much of the knife did Mr. Boyd give you an opportunity to see?
I saw the blades.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's been marked Exhibit E2, another photograph taken by Detective Render, and ask you if you recognize it.
Yes.
What is it?
Looks like the same knife.
You would agree with me that Exhibit E2 shows a knife with approximately a 4-inch blade?
Yes.
Is that consistent with your recollection of the blade which Mr. Boyd used to threaten you?
Yes.
Now I'd like to turn your attention to Exhibit E3. You recognize the item which is shown in Exhibit E3?
Yes.
What is it?
A knife.
Now, is that knife that you see as Exhibit E3 consistent with the knife that Mr. Boyd used to threaten your life?
Yes.
Now I'd like to show you another exhibit, Exhibit E4. Do you recognize the item shown in Exhibit E4?
Yes.
And you would agree with me that it is the second knife which Mr. Boyd used to threaten you. Is that right?
Yes.
And it also had a 4-inch blade.
Yes.
Now, there came a point, I think, in your direct testimony where you said that the first thing Mr. Boyd told you was, and let me see if I got that right, things are going to get bad. Does that sound right?
Yes.
Now, what did you personally make of the statement that Mr. Boyd made, things are going to get bad?
I thought he was going to charge me with the knives.
Now, do you know why Mr. Boyd didn't carry out what you believe to be his next move?
It was probably because I had my gun pointed right at him.
Objection, speculation, Your Honor.
Sustained as to speculation.
Would it be fair to say that when Mr. Boyd drew his weapons, you believed that he was going to charge you?
Yes.
What did you do to prevent Mr. Boyd from charging you?
I backed up.
And what did you do with your weapon to prevent the charge?
I pointed it at him.
Whose lives were threatened by Mr. Boyd?
Myself and Officer Pat Hernandez.
What level of threat did Mr. Boyd pose to you?
Great bodily harm or death.
Based on your training and experience, what were the appropriate responses that you would be authorized to use given what Mr. Boyd did to you?
Shoot him.
Why did you choose to disengage?
When he saw that he froze, they would get more distant.
If you only didn't shoot Mr. Boyd, if decided your weapon.
Yes.
You didn't see the legal conclusion.
I think we are. I'm going to sustain the objection.
Now, after tactically withdrawing from Mr. Boyd, you created distance, is that right?
Yes.
While you were creating distance, you